Hey there everybody, it's Eternal Snowman here with another BLT video. I know it's another video so soon. Yes, it is BLT season. That means that a lot more content is coming out at a much faster pace. And because I did have time today, I decided that it'd be nice to just go through all the matchups and really just talk about it because I do feel like I left out a few things during the other video. And so I just wanted to kind of like go through now that all the lineups have been submitted and kind of just see how all the teams stack up and see if I was like about where I think I did, or where everyone is about where I think they are. So because today's the first day, none of the games have been played except for one, which is my team. Mysterious M beat Terracotta today. And then other than that, everyone else, it was very much no activity for today because, Monday, whatnot. Things are still getting settled. So the conferences are the Stuffles, Weaviles, Alakazams, and Swamperts. I rated the Alakazams as second best teams. Stuffles is the worst. Weaviles as bottom three, I believe, and then the Swamperts in the middle, if I remember correctly. And then the other one is ourselves, the Heatrans, the Blastoises, and the Reshiroms. I believe this pool is a little bit better, but it's not that big of a deal. It's not like last year where we had a much easier pool than everybody else, and it was pretty clear the difference between the two. This one, it's like less clear. So let's start with the first matchup between Stuffles and Weaviles. So 100% GXC versus LKA PKD. I think that it's going to be very cleanly that 100% GXC is going to win. Not much to say here other than I think this is basically he's going to be one of the best Evers players in the tournament. Just looking at who else is playing it, Reggie, Mysterious M, and Terracotta are the only other ones that I would say are potentially better than him, and I think that he can be on par with Reggie and even Terracotta. I'm not too sure. I think Mysterious M is a decent amount better, but he is quite good. And I think he can easily go 3-0 in this pool if they decide to put him in Ubers all 3 weeks. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see Tote versus LCAP, but it is what it is. I suspect Chaitanya will also take OU for, I think he's a much better player than Tote in general. He's in touch with the meta. Tote brings a lot of predictable teams. I don't think he's necessarily a bad player, but I just don't think he is on the level of Chaitanya. I think Snowfall will beat Surfy Teen. I don't think this is going to be really close at all. Snowfall does say that he's rusty with everything that's going on, but don't really see that as going to be a huge deterrent. I think the skill gap is much too big. Ars9 versus Ninja Dog. Interesting that because of the way that the Weavile is drafted, it means that they put Ninja Dog in RU, which is not where he's traditionally had a lot of success, because both him and Serene Grace are on this team, meaning that LC is, or they have 2 really strong LC players. This is part of the reason why I didn't rate them that highly, just because I felt that they kind of messed up in that sense, because they did pick up multiple top tier LC players, but didn't use, they aren't able to fill out the rest of their roster slots as cleanly. I think Ninja Dog is a better player overall than Ars9, but I don't know about his RU experience. This may be closer than people may originally look at just by the name recognition. Ars9 is definitely not a bad player, and this can be something where I would say it's an upset. Oh, by the way, this is a matchup that I think is like 70-30 or 80-20. Chaitanya versus Tote I think is similar, 70-30 or 80-20. Snowfall versus Surfy Teen would be somewhere around like 70-30 or 65-35. However, this matchup I think is actually pretty close. It's like 55-45 in Ninja Dog's favor in my opinion. Maybe a little bit even more even. I think it really depends on what kind of support that Plaza and Rajda should get for their team. And knowing Plaza, I think he can recruit the best talent to help with their like preparations if he wants to. So it depends. Epic Boost versus Future Clouds. I'm gonna say similar to the RU match, not the name recognition that you. Based on name recognition, I think Future Clouds is definitely better. It'll be interesting to see where Epic Boost, like how Epic Boost shows up, and because it's their first tournament, and I think a lot of the Tours Room regulars have like a decent amount to prove. I'm gonna say it's 50-50 for now, or sorry, it's gonna be 60-40 in Future Cloud's favor, mostly because I have a lot of faith in Plaz to be able to make Epic Boost a decent player, to even bring it that close at 60-40, because I think that PG Clouds is a good player and he is favored here if nothing else like goes astray. So it'll be a lot on where the teams come in, and Plaza's excellent NU builder, so that will definitely factor into it. PU, Plimsoll Punks versus GG, I guess, Lamau. I don't know, but Plimsoll Punks is probably much better, just by the fact that today, GG, I guess, Lamau said, like, why didn't you switch out when it was, or why did you switch out or something, when it was Mega Mewtwo Y versus Ultra Necrozma, and like MMY is faster. So it doesn't seem like he understands a lot of stuff like that. Granted, that is Uber, so not, I don't expect every person to be playing with the highest amount of knowledge for every tier, but it's just not a good look in general. So I'm gonna favor Plimsoll Punks here. And he's a solid player, so I'll give the matchup to him 70-30, just because I don't know that much about GG, I guess, Lamau, and that is not a just not a good look. Raja Shu versus Serene Grace. I think this is the most one-sided matchup in this like entire matchup thing. So it's 90-10 Serene's Grace, if not just 100-0. I don't really see that much of a way that Rajdashi wins, other than like Extreme Cheese and Extreme Hacks. And then I don't know the players in this last one, Boyd versus Alternative. I would tend to favor the Weavile's player because, Nightning actually plays doubles at a decently high level, so he might be able to provide teams and build. I'm not too sure though. It's going to be hard. It's really hard to say, but in this week, I'm definitely going to be favoring the Weaviles here. I think they have a more solid overall team. The matchups that the Stuffles will win are Ubers, UU, and PU. And then really look towards NU and RU and doubles as the swing matchups potentially, but I think the Weaviles are favored to win this week. Moving on to the Alakazams versus Swamperts. Dan Demand versus Pidgeot Mega. I think Pidgeot Mega is definitely the better player here. However, because MJ is on the Alakazams, he can provide the team support for Dan Demand, and that definitely will come into consideration. So while I would normally say this matchup would be somewhere around 65-35 or 60-40, I would say that because of MJ's team support, this goes to about a 55-45. Obviously, you have to actually pilot the team at a high level, or a decently high level at least. So you can't just be only carried by that, but it definitely does matter. So Pidgeot Mega is favored here still, but 55-45. Attribute versus Halamon. I think Attribute will win this pretty solidly. I think this is a 60-40, 70-30 even matchup, somewhere around there. It's pretty one-sided. Sam.Tan. Who is this? Is this someone I know? see. I didn't even know he was in BLT. I don't remember this name at all. I guess he's a sub. I'm not too sure. I'm guessing. Well, I just don't know. That means I'm gonna favor Kather. Kyther. I still don't know how to pronounce his name. Don't worry about it. The guy, former Snorlax player. Here, I just think he's a very solid player, and I'll favor the guy I know over the rando. King of Crimea versus the Welsh Wall, probably the best matchup so far. It's going to be definitely heated. I think the Welsh Wall is a good amount better, but I don't think that I think that they're within the same realm. So I think King of Crimea will definitely pose a threat to the Welsh Wall, and I think it's going to be somewhere around a 60-40 matchup favoring the Welsh Wall, but I don't think it's like or I should say like generally the Welsh Wall should be considered the best RU player. I think King of Crimea is probably the second best here. Just the only reason being that because Ham is not playing RU right now, but the Welsh Wall is the best RU player like that is going to be slotted into RU. And the King of Crimea is the second best, so this will be a closer matchup than most other weeks that you would see. Pokeart versus Bad Player. I actually don't know very much about Bad Player, so I'll choose to say that I don't really know who's going to win here. I'm not really sure about either player. Ziri versus Ominous Draco, another headline matchup for this week. This actually, the Zams versus the Swampards has 3 different headline matchups that I think each have their own different storylines going on in it. King of Crimea versus Welsh Wall. This is actually they played last BLT as well. I believe King of Crimea won that one. However, I'm not too sure. Don't quote me on that. And then the PU matchup, I think these two are also the top 2 PU players coming into this matchup. Ziri and Ominous Draco, so the 2 best RU players, the 2 best PU players are playing each other. And then in doubles, SMB versus TTT. I think TTTX has a lot of hype coming into him around like different circles because of VGC accomplishments and stuff. So he's matching up against SMB, who was both the most expensive player and expected to be the best player in doubles by like a relatively large margin here. So it'll be interesting to see how TTT matches up against him. I'm going to be favoring SMB still very heavily, and I'm going to be favoring Ziri really heavily in the PU. I think that they both have a lot more tournament experience and different high-level experience in each of their individual tiers. So definitely favoring them. And then LC, the Amuse, also formerly known as Sky Zuma apparently, versus I'm Just Gray. I think this is going to be a close matchup. It'll be interesting to see because these 2 players still have relatively unknowns. They both have a lot to prove because they don't really have like the track record that some of these other players do. So they have I don't know that much about it. I'm going to say this one is also going to be somewhere around a 50-50. I don't really see either player as really just being better than the other from what I've seen so far. So, I mean, feel free to prove me wrong after I watch a few games of their BLT performance, after like they show what they, how they play on the tournament stage, then I'll make a judgment on how well they are, or how good they are. So that wraps up the Sword Conference, so we can move on to the Shield Conference. I'll talk about the other matchup first, and then I'll give a few of my opinions on like my own matchups as well. So the Bobby Blue Blastoise versus the Respiro Reshiroms. The Reggie versus Jiren. Very interesting in terms of, I mean, Jiren was commenting earlier today on how Terracotta and Mysterious M made bad plays in their game. Honestly, I don't agree with most of the things he said. I'll be interested to see how good he plays in Ubers, because I didn't really expect him to be slotting Ubers that much, but I mean, it kind of makes sense to me. But I think Reggie is a much better player in Ubers, especially. Um, they are both kind of interesting from an attitude perspective, I guess, but in terms of just the matchup, I'm going to give it to Reggie around 60-40. Tragedius versus Maroon, or formerly known as IXGA. Maroon is heavily favored here. I would say probably like 70-30 or something like that. I think he's just a better player, has more tour experience, etc., etc. Oras Mega versus P-Toad. So Oras Mega actually went for quite a bit in the draft, a lot more than I expected. I think a lot of other people expected. I'm not too sure what SWB and Rob knew about him that they felt like it would be worth however much they paid, of like 12 or whatever K, 10 plus K on him. So I'm not too sure, but I think that this matchup is. It depends on how well P-Toad shows up on form, because at P-Toad's best, he is definitely a better player than Oras Mega or Fejiro or whatever he is known by. But I don't know how much he plays Mons anymore. Like, I haven't seen him around very much, so I don't know about this one again. I think because this is week 1, it's much harder for me to make predictions because I haven't really seen a lot of the players play, either in a long time or just like ever. So it is harder to judge like how good they are. Abyssal Ruins or Keeping It Icy versus Carolina. I think Keeping It Icy, coming off the undefeated season, he did go for a lot of money, and I think he's going to make a repeat big performance this time around. I do think that he's quite good, and I do think that he's going to pick up a win here in RU against Carolina, who is not as good. He doesn't play as much Mons anymore nowadays, and in last BLT he used some cheese and stuff to get some wins, but I mean, he's still a solid player, like not terrible, but not at the level of Keeping It Icy. Prince of All Tacos versus Michelius. I don't know how to pronounce that name, I'm sorry. Prince of All Tacos went for 3K. I think sometimes he makes some. He's still a growing player. He's relatively new. I don't know too much about Michelius. I've heard he's a good player. I mean, he has a badge and whatnot. So I know that makes me think that he's been around the competitive scene. Just from that, I think I would probably favor him slightly, but if I had to like pick between the two, but like I said before, because I don't know everything about all these players, it's hard for me to make predictions on that, on some of the matchups like these. Xskelly versus Skipland. I've heard good things about Skipland in PU. I'm not too sure how good he is. He is well known in the PU community from what I know. And Xskelly is still coming off kind of like semi-retirement. I don't know really what to call it, but he's not active in Mons as much. So I'll say Skipland is favored here, but I don't know by how much. I think it's really depends on how well Xskelly shows up and what kind of team he gets. Which kind of transitions into like my general point about this is that I think that one of the big issues with the Blastoise team is that while they have a lot of decent or solid players, a big issue is like how are they gonna transition like a bunch of solid players without team support. So I mean, for players who are like invested in the tour scene, like, you know, myself, MJ, or like Frisso, these guys who have a lot of experience being around big tours and stuff, like as a manager you can kind of get help because of the connections that you have. And so even in the weaker tiers, some of the weaker tier players or lower tier players can still be presented like good teams, and they'll learn to be better as the season goes on because they're given support and help from like top players, or like a lot or like not, it doesn't have to be the highest level player, but like better players than are in BLT a lot of times. So they can elevate the level of the other players, but that's not always the case when or like for SWB and Rob, who aren't around the competitive scene very much, they definitely don't have that same experience. I think it's going to be much harder for them. They both don't have a playing manager and don't have the connections, I don't think, to really allow them to get high team building support for players like Principal Tacos, Xscale, um, like these guys who aren't in touch with the competitive scene, like in feeling the pulse of the meta and stuff. It's much more difficult for them to compete against the like what the meta is if they don't really know, and it's going to be more difficult for them to really um, play to their potential when they're not going to be given the teams that are like, you know, at the very top, like the absolute best teams that some of the other teams will have access to. And then moving on, in LC, Mikav versus Jack in My Box. I don't really know who Jack in My Box is, but Mikav is a top player in LC, and I will heavily favor him here. I think he's a much better player, so heavily favor in this side. And then London versus Havens. I actually haven't seen London play doubles very much recently. Excuse me, sorry. And Havens has been having kind of has been, you know, making his name in the doubles community. I'll say that this one is pretty close, one of the closest of this week for sure. But I'm not too sure who is going to be favored here. I think it's going to be close, and I just want to see a good match, I guess. So I think overall, what did I say? Reggie is favored, Maroon, P-Toad, keeping it IC, 2-2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so even without the result of the doubles game, I think that the Reshoms will win pretty solidly. They have 5 slots that I believe are pretty favored in, or 4 slots I think are pretty favored, and then the ones that will really determine the series probably are the UU and doubles series. And I think they're slightly favored towards the Reshoms. And then finally, it's my own matchup, or my own team's matchup, rather. So the Snorlaxes versus the Heatrans, who I put as the second best team, or the best team, rather, other than us, if I believe that we're the best team. So the Heatrans, definitely kind of what I talked about before, they're going to have the access to the top tier team support. So even players like Richard Pepper and Lugia Numer, who are relative unknowns or like not considered top players, can still be more of a threat because they have access to top teams. So Mysterious M already won. I would favor him anyway over Terracotta. I think he's generally more of a consistent player. He didn't play the best Pokemon he's ever played today, but definitely still enough to win. Dennis the Menace versus Ham. This one's going to be a highlight match. Definitely one of the best of the week alongside the 3 of the other series of the series. I think Ham is definitely going to be a tough opponent for us, and I think Ham is probably slightly favored here. But Ham is not really an OU main, I guess, is the only real caveat to him, but I think he's still good enough at OU to really beat anybody. I think no matter where you slot him, he's going to be favored versus almost anybody. With the exception being like some of the top tier specialists like SMB or whatever, or like Mysterious M. Maybe I would say Mysterious M is favored, but it's definitely going to be a tough match and definitely a highlight match as well. And then myself versus Spitfire Arcanine. I think I'm favored here, honestly. I'm very surprised that he is not going into RU. Maybe he requested to play UU specifically so he could face me or something. I'm not too sure. But I think I'm favored here. I haven't seen Spitfire Arcanine play that much UU, but I mean, I've had better tour results than him for sure. I mean, whatever. We'll see the result of the game to see who's actually better. Harley versus Lugia Numer. I think Harley is a better player just from the replays I've watched and whatnot. However, it's really hard to say once again with the relative unknowns. At this point is where I'll say that because Trace is an argue main and he's has a lot of connections in argue, this is where we might get an advantage from having these kind of connections as a manager, and also because Trace himself is a top argue player. Sanjay versus Richard Pepper. I think Sanjay is easily the better player here. I don't really think it's close. I think Sanjay's going to take this one easily. Ronman 5 versus Yoshi 972. I don't know who Yoshi 972 is, so I'm not too sure. This one's going to be probably a tough matchup. I don't really know who's going to win. Once again, like the previous, a lot of the previous matchups, like I said before, I don't really know both players, and I'll have to see after they play in week 1 to really get an idea of how good they are. Civicon versus Fristo Eva. I think Fristo is favored here. He is a top LC player. I did talk about this in my other video, but he is maybe a little bit of a notch below players like Serene Grace and McCav, but definitely within that elite tier here in BLT, and he is probably going to take down Civicon relatively easily. And then in doubles, it's the Cheesin one versus Shadow Monster 4. I think his shadow name is Shadow Monster 7 or something like that. Not that important, but I think Cheese is favored here as well. I mean, if he plays well and doesn't tilt and doesn't get cheesed, I think he will play. He is definitely favored. So I believe we're favored this week in what I believe is kind of the best team. I think honestly, I feel like the Heatrans kind of missed on how they did their lineup a little bit. I think they could have given themselves a better chance of winning the series if they did their lineup a little bit better or a little differently, although I'm not too sure how. But I do think that like they kind of needed Fristo to match up with one of our top players to kind of try to take off a little bit of our the edge, because I think Fristo is one of the top players, and they should utilize him to do so. Or like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think that the Heatrans, because of who they drafted, or have a lot of flexibility. Fristo and Ham both can play basically every tier except for doubles at a high level. Ham can play every tier except for doubles at a high level, and Fristo can play every tier at a high level, I think, except for maybe PU. I haven't really seen him play PU. So like they should utilize their flexibility to kind of play to their opponent's strengths as well. So I think that's part of the reason why I feel like they had the ability to be such a good team. That said, maybe they had the wrong read on where I was going, or like how our team was gonna be constructed. So there's that, of course. Maybe they thought I was gonna be playing LC or something like that, and so they wanted to slot Fristo against me. But I think overall, a lot of good matchups this week, especially in this series. The Alakazams versus the Swampers have 3 really headline matchups in the King of Crimea versus the Welshwall, Ziri versus Omnis Draco, SMB versus TTT. And in our division, there was Mysterious M versus Terracotta is a highlight matchup, and then Dennis versus Ham is also a pretty a big one to watch. And I think that overall throughout this, and Havens versus London is going to be one to watch as well. And I think throughout this season, as it progresses, we're definitely going to see like players improve and whatnot. So how and like teams improve in general. So how everybody shows up on week 1 will definitely be different from how they show up like on week 5, like in the playoffs, or week 4 and 5 in the playoffs. So don't read too much into it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But at the same time, it is going to be important to like see how the players do in general, for me to form my opinions on who's good and who's not in the coming weeks. So sorry about the video being kind of a lot of unknowns kind of from my side, but in the future weeks, after I feel like I have a better grasp on it, I'll be going through kind of like what players I feel like are actually good and what players aren't, so that you guys can have a better understanding of the players as well and have just a generally better predictions. That said, that'll be about it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed, and um, look forward to more BLT content, which is going to be coming out at the end of this week. After all the matches I've done, I'll probably be putting out a video, kind of similar to this one, except I'm also going to be going through some of the things that happened this week. So at the beginning of next week, I'll go through all the matchups through this week, which ones, especially some of the interesting matches, and then a preview of next week as well. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time for more BLT content.